Let's get started, Susana. I'll give you the floor to introduce Fernando. Thank you beforehand to all of you joining us, especially Fernando Pindado, who is willing to participate today to give us a presentation in one of our regular workshops in the participatory group. Without further ado, Susana, I give you the floor. Thank you very much, Luis. Well, I can't change my background, but that's fine. Good afternoon to you all. Good morning. As Marta says, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are around the world. We are all gathered here for the 20th Experts Workshop on Good Practices of Participation. We've already reached the 20th workshop, which I believe is something that we should be celebrating. There's a lot of expectation with regards to this workshop. Today, Fernando Pindado is here with us. He's an expert, one of the best experts of citizen participation in our country. He has already collaborated in other courses in the master's degree. Today, in our Good Practices group between UNED and the City Council of Madrid, we want to talk about face-to-face and digital participation. Fernando, I don't want to dwell on your CV, but you're a specialist, you're an advisor and consultant of public policy, community action, citizen participation. You are a jurist, which is an important perspective that you have. You've held different roles, namely General Secretary of the International Observatory of Participatory Democracy, and you've also worked for the City Council of Barcelona. Among others, you've already published many different books. That's all. I want to get to the topic for this afternoon, digital and face-to-face participation and how AI can reinforce or strengthen these elements or otherwise. Anyway, I won't give you any spoilers of this discussion. If you wish, Fernando, you can share your presentation. I'm sure that there will be an interesting debate coming up and a Q&A. So let's stick to the an hour and a half, maximum 2 hours of workshop that we've got. I think this is enough time for us to get to the debate. You have the floor, Fernando. Thank you so much for accepting our invitation and for being with us this afternoon. Thank you very much, Susana, Luis, and all of you organizing this debate, which I see that these discussions date back a long time. And it's a pleasure to be with all of you joining us from different parts of the planet to share my reflections. When I heard about the opportunity to participate in this discussion about digital democracy and digitalization in general, because of my training and qualifications, I'm more analogical than anything else. I told Susana that I'm not very savvy. I remember that when we were in the program of what later became the CDIM platform dedicated to participation in Barcelona, the engineers, the technicians, those who know about digitalization heard me tell them that I started working with a manual printer. Now we are in the digital realm, but everything that is digital, I don't want to use virtual. Instead, I want to use the term digital because it has to do with information that gets to us that we receive through digital means or virtual means, in the same way that in the 15th century, the printing industry changed the way that people communicated. We can't even understand the protest of Luther or Protestantism if printing hadn't existed already. He lived in a small town in the middle of Europe, and that would have been all. Nobody would have heard his message. But what happens when internet breaks through? The possibility today to gather from different parts of the world to talk live. I mean, digitalization impacts all of our environment, and for sure, it will have an impact on politics. My proposal for reflection, what I want to share, because there's not that many of us today, I hope that this is a more interactive session. My proposal is it that egregious? Is it that impactful? Is the change that impactful when we think about communication between peoples? And this is one of the first questions that I've got for you, because you might have different experiences that contrast with mine. Can digital democracy exist when I vote, when I use when I vote through post or electronically? Is that postal democracy? Is it electronic? Am I using an algorithm? Can we streamline democracy? Does the tool that we use to exercise this right impact the results of an election? I've read and heard in many occasions the idea of digital democracy, the trend that we've got to invent, I don't want to use the word invent, but to use new words to talk about things that already exist. What would be concerning to me, and I would like to share with you, is when we are talking about technology, internet, and social media, and the immediate transmission of information, expressions, and opinions, are we building a different model of political system? Are we building a different democratic model? This I don't have the answer to. The democratic system, and I can later get into further detail about this, but I think that the democratic system has a certain foundations that are similar to what liberal democracies have been building in the 18th and 19th century. It's similar in essence. Obviously, the exercise of the right to vote is a fundamental right, not only for men, but there's female suffrage. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. But human rights have to do with the possibility to exercise participation in politics. You don't need a specific income to have this right. We're talking about universal suffrage, but the framework, the idea that there's a system defined by division of powers, the legislative branch made up mostly by people elected by public vote, the executive branch, depending on the country, will be a parliamentary majority or popular vote. There's an interpretation of laws approved in a parliament. I mean, this framework should be similar. I can't imagine any other situation, maybe using more or less technology, but similarly. Let me share with you a couple of slides. Here, you can see a survey where people were asked, would you feel comfortable with reducing the number of MPs in your country and for those seats to be occupied by an artificial intelligence algorithm that would have access to your data to maximize your interests? Because it's difficult for us to know, to discern what we like, there would be an algorithm that would collect all of our data, all the information of what we do daily, our ideology, our football team, who we socialize with. It would collect all of this data to build a political profile. And when faced with this question, most European countries said that they were strongly in favor, except for China. This was the case for most countries. Most countries would be okay with replacing people with AI, as though politics could be exercised only through the interaction of algorithms that, I mean, yes, there is AI that learns, that is fed back, but they still have human contributions, right? As far as I know, algorithms are built by humans with their ideological, cultural, and otherwise bias, and these algorithms will collect data from me depending on what I do on my day-to-day life, and based on all of this data, they will determine what I would accept or not in a parliament. I think that this is particularly concerning, especially the fact that Spain has the highest amount of positive responses. It's possible in the case of Spain, it's possible that it might have to do with interpretation of politics and politicians, an interpretation that they are all corrupt, they are all evil, they're only moved by their own interests. Of course, there are bad people in politics, like there are bad people in sociology and political sciences and medicine and architecture, but that perspective, that democracy and politics is done for politicians who have self-interest that are more important, this might have explained this result. I still find these proposals concerning, thinking that something beyond me can intervene on my behalf, intervene in politics, I find troubling, to say the least. In this first part of my intervention, my question to you is, should we count on a democratic system that is based on this kind of interactions where it's not even necessary to carry out elections? We rely on the engineer of the algorithm to decide. We trust that it will work just fine. I don't remember who the author was, but many years ago, somebody said Amazon will work really well the day that the next book that you read is the one Amazon recommended. We're far past that point. Technology, I mean, not only does technology predict, but also prescribe what is going to happen, where we will travel, what we will eat, what airline we will choose, because the system can anticipate this. Translating this to politics, I find extremely troubling, because the construction of a future of solving problems of the present, relying on machines and algorithms and AI for all of this, I find a dehumanization of politics and a challenge. I think it's wonderful that there's a robot that can make a cut in the human body and perform a surgery. But I hope that the person giving me my diagnosis is a human. I don't want a robot to explain to me what's happening. Maybe I'm old-fashioned. But in any case, I think that this element should be taken into account. That's my first topic for you. Can we have a democratic system that is fundamentally based on internet, AI, algorithms? The next element is the most positive aspect, obviously. An AI system that is constantly receiving, feeding back information can optimize or streamline the tools that we have used to boost public participation in public policy. Many of those here working in the city council or other institutions, for sure you've kickstarted some sort of channel as a participatory process for a long time. We've had people talking about a specific topic. This data is collected, the discourses are analyzed, and we extract ideas that might help encourage political decisions. Normally, these sort of tools and channels don't have a very wide scope because we need to analyze speeches and opinions, and we find it difficult when when the number of people surveyed is over 500. You need to have a reasonable number. But if there were an algorithm or a technical app allowing us to analyze discussions held by 10,000, 15,000 people, this would help gather more opinions. When you open up a debate on any topic, there aren't that many opinions, not as many opinions as people. There are 19 people here. For sure, there are 19 opinions among us. In every topic, we can establish blocks like people who are totally for, totally against, and somewhere in the middle. We can split people in groups to help those making decisions to get knowledge, to obtain knowledge on people's opinions. It's not only a survey. Survey is a multiple choice exam, and then you just analyze the number of responses. But instead, you must allow a lot of people to talk among them. I'm not talking about discussion separately with a machine. Instead, human dialogue, the result of such debates, might help collect opinions, arguments used to maintain a certain opinion. This is an example of relatively easy tool. I don't know anything about IT, but building this kind of channel might help understand what people think about mobility in a specific neighborhood, specific part of the city. What do people think? Those who just get their car, those who ride the bike, what are their arguments? What are their opinions? Even if 15,000 people participate, you can't split them in blocks, analyzing their discussions, analyzing their opinions. And this helps politicians and decision makers to respond to their contributions. I can answer these different blocks instead of answering 15,000 responses. That is the first example, or that is the first segment of questions for you. I don't want to extend my speech very much, but what do you think about this idea? Could we have a democratic system that is based fundamentally on an algorithm? And what might be some positive elements of using AI? But let me give you the last slide. Let me share with you the last slide. There you go. Here it is. There you go. This is a study of open society from last year, asking in different countries about their opinion of a military or army role. They have a question about whether people think that politicians should bother going to elections and running a country in a democratic way. Now, those under 35 years old, 42% think that an army rule wouldn't be that bad an option, probably because they haven't lived an army rule before. What do I want to convey with this slide? Democracy, either we translate this to the human code and we make it obvious that it's the least evil option, not or the least bad. It's not the best, but it's the least bad. This is a quote by Winston Churchill. It's the one that has shown a better capacity to solve people's problems and facilitate coexistence in Europe. Obviously, the Latin American and African context is completely different, but it has shown its effectiveness and it can be useful. The perception that the democratic system is the least evil of models or the most useful is not as generalized as we might guess. This is not the topic for today's discussion, but I recommend that you read the VDEL reports. VDEL is a research group based in Gothenburg about the state of democracy in the world. 65% of the population in the world lives in under an army rule. Authoritarian regimes are the most common in the world. Today we have a debate about digital democracy, the perception that army rule is not that bad, and MPs going to parliament is slightly boring and unnecessary. They shouldn't even bother. So, if we had to build a system based on technology to improve the quality of our democracy, we should be thinking about, well, first, we should define what does quality mean in the context of democracy. What would be those elements that might allow us to improve the quality of our democracy? I can only come up with one option. For democracy to work, you need democrats. Do we have actual democrats in our country? I believe so. Many more than we believe. The problem is, how do we make it obvious that this system is adequate, appropriate to solve people's problems? If people perceive that democracies and policies need to solve their personal problems, this is a mistake. It's not about their personal problems. They are a part of a group of our population. I am in the group of people over 65 years old with specific needs. My daughter is over 45 years old. She has different needs. So politics and democracies tend to solve collective problems, not individual problems. If we can go to the collective, you need the human code allowing for this to happen. We should work on it. I remember when I was talking to IT experts, when we were created the CDIM platform, we finally reached an agreement that they would talk about digital code and I talk about judicial code. I need to see Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. What happens if X, Y, or Z? I need certain order. When the human element is clear to you, in articles, or if this happens, then this is applied. This can be translated to algorithms and technology. What are the elements that might allow us to improve the quality of our system in what we call channels, means, or technology to boost citizen participation? Going to the polls, voting in elections is the main way, but there are other channels for those people with the so that people who have the responsibility to rule our country can make decisions on policies. They can open up these windows or doors for an orderly intervention of other people's input. Those who have political responsibility will decide at the end of the day. not the 18 or 19 of us here in the meeting. We won't change the world, but we can give our opinion. And if someone wants to listen, they are more than welcome. Now, when I think about systems of participation, I can't come up with anything that is not in this slide. There are certain channels and certain stakeholders. Channels can be divided in processes because they have a specific timeline. Their organization I won't get into, but you do establish that this channel will last for a month, 2 months, talking about a specific topic. Then we've got bodies. Unlike processes, bodies do last longer in time. People who give contributions, input to improve public life in terms of sports, green spaces, etc. The fact that these bodies are long lasting doesn't mean that the people who form these bodies will be there for a long time. And finally, what we call voting in referendums or consultations. When I know that as a Catalan, people tend to be slightly scared when I talk about a referendum, but there are many, many other kinds of referendums at different levels. Referendums are scarce, and when they do take place, they tend to change the name. For instance, they change the name from consultation to survey. They have certain limitations, but at the end of the day, it's about voting in an anonymous manner. They're sporadic channels. Mikel from Gipuzkoa can explain this to you. There are citizen assemblies where people have been chosen randomly to work on a specific topic, like a jury, but slightly larger. These are the different channels. What about the drivers or stakeholders, institutional action, citizen initiatives? In Spain, we don't insist too much on collecting signatures. In Switzerland, it's very common. It happens almost every 3 months. In Latin America, it's very popular too. It exists in Spain, but it's not very popular, although we should take it into account. And this all needs to be based on a system of guarantees, the guarantee that these channels and drivers are not being used incorrectly. There's a list of people who can vote. For instance, in elections, you cast your ballot. There's a ballot per person who's voting. This is relatively easy. But in another process, for instance, of public participation, where 500 people have come to debate, it's a bit easier to manipulate it. So we always need a system of guarantees. In the digital framework, it's totally fine. I mean, collecting e-signatures is fine. Voting virtually is doable. But we can also amplify discussions, broaden them through channels or platforms like Zoom. All of this is feasible, but I wouldn't call this a digital democracy, but instead just enhancing our democracy through technology. And with this, I finish my presentation. But let's clarify then. What's the human code that needs to be translated to the digital world? Signatures, digital votes, participatory budgets are an amazing example that is currently underway. But the second question is, should the digital realm replace face-to-face participation? Are these two complementary, alternative? I'd say that the digitalization can amplify, encourage transparency, improve certain aspects, but we are social beings at the end of the day. I don't think you can replace the human element. Screens are fantastic, but I'd love to meet you differently, of course. Those who are here know that when you are giving a lecture, face to face, the sensations are way different to online courses. We can amplify our discussions, but this doesn't mean that it's better. Everything has advantages and disadvantages. In my opinion, in any case, the digital element can never replace the human element. Can we have a digital democracy? Can AI help us improve all of this? Or quite the opposite? Is it an element of control? What is the human code that we need to translate to the digital world? We have a conceptual framework of the channels that we can use to encourage citizen participation. And can this framework keep human elements, or can it be fully replaced by the digital element? Now we've got an hour. I mean, if you have no questions, I can talk to you for 10 hours, but I prefer you to intervene as well. Thank you very much, Fernando. Thank you for all of the matters that you are putting on the table. I'm terrified by the data that you've shared, especially with regards to the youth's perception of politics. It's quite scary. Let's now open up the debate. I totally agree that you cannot talk about digital democracy, but instead talk about digital means as precisely so, the means to reach an effect, to have an impact. But I have a remark that I'd like to share. How we've leveraged the use of digital means throughout the pandemic, which have grown exponentially because of the COVID pandemic precisely. We've seen positive effects for a larger representation in decision-making processes. The problem of face-to-face participation is that in a small town, in a very controlled environment, it's easy to do, it's feasible, and you can call it representative of the town, of the sector. But in large cities, and here you have representatives of the City Council of Madrid, digital means have a very important, very significant function. In a way, you are telling us too that the digital shouldn't replace the human aspect. We should never lose the face-to-face gatherings. So how do we do this? How we increase representation through digital means without losing some of the characteristics that are necessary of the face-to-face methodology? Let me answer in a Galician way. And I don't want to offend anyone from Galicia, but this is based on my personal experiences. If you want to collect signatures for the popular legislative initiative, which happens in any regional context, if you only collect e-signatures, which you could totally do, I don't know about the legislation of each region in Spain, but in Barcelona, the City Council of Barcelona allows for the collection of e-signatures, but you're missing an enormous opportunity to go out to the streets and talk to people. The first initiative in Barcelona that I participated in Barcelona had to do with zoos and the animal rights. I remember that we installed tables around the neighborhood, and they had 2 months to collect signatures. In 2 months, they managed to get more members to sign up compared to e-signatures. If we had only collected e-signatures, there would have been no interaction with citizens. Debates such as this one, I mean, it's perfect in the digital world. It allows us to connect at different times from different places. But if we really wanted to get to the depth of the matter, we should find a face-to-face meeting, because the lecture interaction, the coffee breaks. I mean, we're human beings. We have needs to feel one another, to touch one another, to listen to one another. Maybe not the 40-year-olds, but my generation definitely. In a small town, as you were saying, during the pandemic, maybe in a large city, as much as it's possible, I think that we should regulate participatory channels by banning, I don't like to say prohibit or ban, but I think we should ban fully digital processes. Only digital means we need to force social drivers to go out to take to the streets and talk to their neighbors. If not, I mean, let me mention another initiative from Barcelona that had to do with restoration. We wanted to modify an ordinance regulating terraces. There was a collection of signatures that last 1 month, but it was very easy. People were drinking and having tapas, and they just signed because somebody was there to explain to them. Well, you might like the initiative more or less, but the possibility to talk to people, to explain your proposals, to get your message listened to, even if you disagree, people need to listen to each other. It's a political, pedagogical activity. If you only do this through machines, there's a trend to be more polarizing, to be a bit more extreme, to ridiculize, to mock your enemy, so your enemies, your opponents. Social media is full of insults, full of discourses that definitely don't lead to the construction of harmony, of a consensus. I don't want to talk about building 2 or 3 roads if they're just going to insult me. And it's more difficult to see confrontation face to face. It's true that the internet and social media increases the scope of representation. I'm not a caveman, but I don't want to be the sort of person who's just communicating behind the screen. Thank you very much. There are many questions on the chat, so if you wish to intervene, feel free to comment on your remarks. Cristina, your turn. You have the floor. Good afternoon. In line with what I've just heard, I know that this is his personal opinion. The digital topic is complicated because many people don't trust digital democracies. Thinking about elections at a municipal, regional, national level, people think that their digital vote can be manipulated. So we need to encourage trust among our citizens. We need them to understand that these votes will be private. Same thing with digital signatures. We need to guarantee that votes are anonymous. So the digital topic is fantastic, but there's a long way to walk. There are many people that are skeptical with regards to voting online. Same thing with the topic of algorithms. Algorithms are built by people with a freedom of opinion. These algorithms are built by people who are kind of imposing their bias, their way of thinking. Who can you trust these algorithms are neutral, unbiased, 100%? Let me give you an example. Cristina, I've worked in the central headquarters in Catalonia as a general director of participation for 8 years. I met a council member from Baix Llobregat that allowed me to travel to Switzerland, to give lectures, and to receive information about the Swiss system. The Swiss democracy is very interesting. They vote every 3 months. We went there and we saw them counting votes. They would put the votes in the machines that you use to count money, in the same way that you count notes. I asked the mayor, "Do you trust this machine?" And he said, "Well, if we count money, why wouldn't we count votes? If you trust the machine to count your money properly, same thing with votes." Let me give you the example of banks. How often do you go to the bank nowadays to withdraw your money? Most transactions happen through algorithms, accounts, and you feel that security. You feel that it's safe. And if there's an incident, for instance, I was in Mexico for the elections on the 2nd of June. I was contacted by the bank telling me, "Hey, we've spotted that you are in a different location. My IP," I mean, the IP is the same. It was my computer, but they located me. There's a certain control, which, yes, needs some work still. You are totally right that people are skeptical. They don't trust machines. I had the experience of a popular vote in a city council that I was working for, and we contacted a company to organize e-votes, and we were explained how they work, and it was impossible to manipulate these. The polls were opened with the digital print of 5 members of the municipal groups who need to be there to open this ballot box. The codes had around 60 to 70 characters, and to open up the vote, to count the number of votes, you had to use the code. Again, we were explained by the technician that they would shake the digital ballot box so that the first vote coming out was not the vote of the first person who voted. It was forbidden for people to vote electronically and face to face. There was only one case of a person trying to vote through the two means out of this 8,000 people voting. So it's easy. The